This week on the Destination Angler.
I'd say a banner day is fish for maybe 2 to 4 hours and you're catching 30 to 50 fish. They're ranging in size from like 10 up to like 16 inches. I'd say that's a red letter day fishing in Alpine Lake.
Welcome to the Destination Angler Podcast, the podcast for anglers who travel. And I'm your host, Steve Haigh. We go right to the source, the local guides and experts, to build your knowledge of top fishing locations around North America. It's a big world out there. Now go and fish it.
I'm going away for a while, but I'll be back soon. Whoa, whoa.
Hey anglers, welcome back to another episode of the Destination Angler, brought to you by Anglers Coffee, perfecting the coffee experience for the fly fishing community and anglers everywhere with small batch coffee delivered to your doorstep. It's darn near perfect. And by Trout Routes, the #1 fishing app helping you find new trout waters so you spend less time on the road and more time doing what you love, trout fishing. Don't leave home without it. To all you listeners out there, thank you for sending your words of encouragement, like this one from Adam from Wisconsin. Hey man, I love your podcast and listen to it while I'm traveling. And this one from JMT. Great job interviewing passionate people. As a trip planner and lover of adventure, this is a must listen. Hey, a big thank you for all you folks for listening and sharing the Destination Angler with your buddies. Coming up on the Destination Angler, we're headed to Cody, Wyoming in the Shoshone River with Tim Wade of North Fork Anglers. Then we head south to Belize for a masterclass on permit fishing with superstar guide Will Flack of the Belize Permit Club. And be sure to backcast to catch the last episode of the Destination Angler on Seneca Creek in West Virginia with coldwater fisheries biologist David Thorne. Hey, if you like small, remote streams in a beautiful mountain setting, Seneca Creek may just be the experience you've been dreaming about. You won't want to miss these shows. And today, our destination are the Alpine lakes of Central Idaho, and our guest is John Heckel, Regional Fisheries Biologist for Idaho Fish and Game. Idaho boasts the largest intact wilderness in the lower 48, and the Lost River drainage is home to dozens and dozens of remote and rugged alpine lakes chock full of hungry trout. If you're looking for rugged scenery, high catch rates, and solitude, then you're going to love this show. John is an avid outdoorsman who loves chasing anything from trout to upland birds to big game, and he's fished just about every lake in this area and gives us a mini course on how to find fish and enjoy these lakes, including using llamas to pack your gear in. So listen in as we escape the crowds and the heat down low and venture into the wilderness with John. Well, hey, John, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, super excited to be talking about Central Idaho. Man, I love that state. A couple of weeks ago when we first started talking, you were telling me about how you can rent llamas as a way to get up to these alpine lakes. And I was just so fascinated by that. And you've actually done this a couple of times, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a pretty unique opportunity that we have in our region of Idaho Fish and Game. So I work in the Upper Snake region, and there just so happens to be a llama outfitter nearby. And last year we were put in touch with them, and we decided to give llamas a try to pack in our gear to some high mountain lakes. And we ended up doing, I think, 4 trips last year with llamas.
Nice. How are llamas different than horses? I mean, I've heard like llamas can like get real stubborn and spit at you and things like that. But I think you were saying you had a pretty good experience.
Yeah, I did. I was very fortunate. We had some of the quote unquote veteran llamas that we were able to take up in the mountains, and so they had a few years under their belts of packing gear. They are different than horses. You know, you can't ride them, so you still have to hike. And they're smaller than horses, so they can't pack as much gear. But you can divvy it up. You know, you can take a train of llamas just like you can do a pack train of horses or mules. But they're also, I think, in my opinion, a little more predictable than horses. So llamas, you can read their facial expressions and their ear expressions to kind of get an idea of if they're in a good mood, a bad mood. And Yeah, I mean, they can be just as stubborn as a mule per se, uh, but
Yeah.
they need breaks too on the trail, and I think that they've probably gotten that reputation because if they get tired, they'll just stop. And I mean, it's a 400-pound critter, so it's kind of hard to move them along if they don't want to go. But yeah, I had a great experience with them.
Oh, good, good. And then what is a llama doing if it's in a bad mood?
Its ears will generally go backwards, like kind of parallel with its head.
Yeah.
And if they're gonna spit, you can tell. Like they can really get that hockaloogie thing going, and you know, step away. If you hear that sound, it's like, all right, I'm gonna step away, and you can do your thing. But
You hear them getting ready to hock a loogie then, huh?
yeah, it's kind of interesting. I mean, like you hear it in their chest and whatnot, and I've seen it happen to other llamas. So, llamas that are in a disagreement, so to speak. I've seen them spit on each other, but never had one spit on me. So it's been a good relationship so far I've had with llamas.
That's awesome. Oh my gosh. And you're a bird hunter too. How's the bird hunting been this fall?
Yeah, that's right. I really like upland birds. We've got a lot of country in the Upper Snake region, which kind of encompasses, eastern Idaho from the Wyoming border the whole way out to kind of the central part of the state on the other side of the Snake River Plain. And we've got, several species of grouse. We've got sharptail, which are a ton of fun. We also have two species of forest grouse, duskies and rough grouse, and I'll chase all three of them. And they live in different kinds of habitats, so it
Yeah.
really provides opportunities to explore, the high mountains, the mid-range mountains, and then the big open plains, the grassy grassland areas too.
That's awesome. And then did you get an elk tag this year?
I sure did. I was very fortunate in drawing this year. I got one elk tag, an extra deer tag, and then a regular deer tag. So
Oh man.
lots of hunting is going to occur this October, November for me.
Well, you got to have a freezer the size of a Volkswagen to carry all that around, right?
Yeah, yeah, you do. I'll be buying a new freezer this year, in particular if I'm that successful.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, you can always ship it out to Indiana where I live, man. I'll take some of that off your hands.
All right, yeah, we can work something out.
I'm kidding you. John, what's your favorite game to eat? What's the best tasting in your mind?
Probably elk and sharp-tailed grouse. Those are two of my favorites.
Yeah, I love elk too. I just don't have it very much. Usually got to go to a nice restaurant to get it, and I'm not sure where it's actually from. Someone told me they raise them in like New Zealand or something and ship them in. It's not even real elk, but anyway. Well, with Idaho, I was looking this up before the show. Idaho has the fourth highest percentage of public land in the country, behind Alaska, Nevada, and Utah. And does that translate into like great public access for hunting and fishing in your mind in Idaho?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that it provides residents and non-residents, just sportsmen in general. It provides them with a lot of opportunities in Idaho, and in particular our region. All these high mountain lakes that we've talked about and that I'll talk about today. They're all on public land, and
Nice.
there are trail systems maintained by the U.S. Forest Service and other entities that allows uh, an abundance of access to get to these open spaces if you're seeking solitude or whatever it may be. So, yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why Idaho is such a desirable place to come hunt and fish because of the access that we have for anybody, for the public in general.
Well, all right. So let's talk about that. So Idaho is known around the world as a fantastic place to trout fish. Like, why do you? What is it about Idaho? Obviously, a lot of public land, but what is it about Idaho that you think just makes it so amazing for the fly fishermen?
That's a great question, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the rivers in our region. We've got the famous Henry's Fork of the Snake River, which is part of the Upper Snake region, and we also have the South Fork Snake River. And the Henry's Fork, when you think about it, a lot of people think about hatches if they've come and fished it or if they've just heard about it. And that's one of the reasons why it's such a great fishery in this portion of the state, because the rivers are very productive. There's a ton of food in there, and the temperatures are just optimal for trout growth. And we've got some really large fish in these rivers, multiple species. And if you like to chase hatches, both the Henry's Fork and the South Fork, and for that matter, all the tributaries and all the other rivers in our region, as well as throughout the state, have some awesome hatches for stone flies, big salmon flies, and a bunch of different mayfly species. And so I think because the productivity of these fisheries is why a lot of people flock here, because you can hit 3 different hatches in a single day on the Henry's Fork at the right time of year, and
Really?
you can catch
Wow.
fish up in the upper 20s. And so I think that's it. That's why it's like this trout mecca, because they grow
Yeah.
so well. And on top of that, we just talked about public access. We've got an abundance of public access to enjoy these resources.
Right. It's like a perfect mix. Let's talk about alpine lakes. So, I've got my own ideas why I like alpine lakes, but give us your thoughts on why you should consider alpine lakes.
So, in my personal opinion, I like the alpine lakes because the solitude, you can oftentimes have an entire lake to yourself for multiple days if you decide you want to camp on one lake. We've got, some circuits of lakes with trails where you can fish and camp at multiple lakes all in one trip. And the abundance of fish, in these lakes is also generally pretty high, and they don't see flies very often, so they're generally not very picky. So, combining all of that with the solitude, the high catch rates,
Yeah.
and then just the quality of it all, those are the reasons why I like them so much. And we did a survey for Idaho anglers in about 2017, and alpine lake fishing ranked the second highest fishing experience of all the anglers that were surveyed in that angler opinion survey. So, and that solitude was one of the reasons why so many people like it, and I agree with that. You can get up there in the high country, and it's scenic. You're alone. You see wildlife, and the fishing is just really good on top of it all.
Yeah, I totally agree with all those. I've had some of my best days on alpine lakes. That fish in my logo that you see, in my podcast logo, that I caught that fish at 10,000 feet in Montana,
Oh wow.
up in the Beartooth Range. Yeah, it's 24-inch cutthroat. I mean, it is, how a fish gets that big at 10,000 feet with, 2 months of grow season. That's a lot of fun. How well can you do? Like, what's kind of an average day? What is like a banner day up at these lakes?
I'd say a banner day is fish for maybe 2 to 4 hours, and you're catching 30 to 50 fish. And they're ranging in size from like 10 up to like 16 inches. I'd say that's a red letter day fishing an alpine lake. And, we've got lakes that are more productive than others. And so the fish grow bigger, they grow faster. Um, I, like you've said there, like you caught a 24-inch trout at a lake at 10,000 feet. I mean, that's exceptional. I haven't even caught a fish that large in an alpine lake. My biggest is
It's my
21,
only
21
one.
inches. Yeah.
Man, I did measure it. If people were thinking, how do you know it was 20? I did measure. I had a tape measure. We measured it. So,
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, throwing in a little garment tape measure, always a good idea.
right.
And I think that a typical day is probably you fish for half the day and you're probably catching, a couple dozen fish, and spending your time walking around the lake, finding different nooks and crannies, and really learning about what's going on, what the fish are keying in on, and just soaking it all in. So we generally have pretty high catch rates in our high mountain lakes, both in our region and across the state.
Yeah, boy, that's exciting. Wait, so your personal best is 21. Do you remember when you caught that? Can you tell us that story?
Yeah, so I was fishing in a similar situation as you at a lake that was around 10,000 feet. It was a little above that. This lake in particular is very large. I mean, I don't know the acreage off the top of my head, but it's pretty large. It's really deep. It's a cirque lake, so it's quite deep. And there was one side of the lake that was kind of this open, grassy tundra area. And then as we walked around the lake, we got into this large scree field, where the edge of the cirque, or where the deepest part of the cirque was. And so we got to the lake and we saw cutthroats swimming everywhere, and they were in the low teens to mid teens in size. And we were throwing terrestrials and just having a blast. It was like every other cast you'd catch a fish. If you see one cruising, you could cast in front of them and they would eat it with reckless abandon.
Yeah.
And so we were walking around this lake. I was fishing a black beetle, just a pattern I tied. It was just foam black beetle with some flash as the legs and peacock herl body, and then a little white spot so you could see it on its thorax. And
Yeah.
and then my buddy was fishing, I think, a hopper style pattern, and we're just leapfrogging each other, looking for fish, stopping at the points, fishing off the points. And I was in front when we got to the scree field, and I was just walking along, casting the fish, and all of a sudden I just saw this submarine cruising the bank, and I was like, holy cow. And I cast right in front of that fish, and sure enough, it came up and slurped it. And man, that was a ton of fun.
Oh, man.
Great time landing that fish.
What kind of fish?
That was a Yellowstone cutthroat trout.
Oh, man, nice. Yeah, did he put up a good fight?
Yeah, it fought really hard. Dove a few times into that deeper water, and I think I was fishing a 4-weight, and we ended up having a net, luckily, and we landed it and then taped it out, and it was just a hair over 21.
That is really exciting. Hey anglers, are you looking for a darn near perfect cup of coffee to start your day? Then do yourself a favor and check out anglerscoffee.com. That's right, Anglers Coffee is made by anglers for anglers, delivered to your doorstep, one batch at a time. They start with the very best coffee beans selected for their great flavor and responsible growing methods. Then each batch is roasted fresh daily. The result is a wide selection of roast styles that will satisfy the most discerning coffee lover. And now you can enjoy Angler's Coffee anywhere, anytime with the Dry Dropper single-serving coffee in a tea bag. Just add water. And this isn't your mother's instant coffee. It's a single serving of carefully dark-roasted, fresh ground and nitro-sealed coffee. A percentage of each sale goes to some great nonprofit organizations that directly impact the fly fishing community. So head on over to anglerscoffee.com to check out their great selection of coffee and the organizations they support. If you're not 100% satisfied, they'll give you your money back, no questions asked. That's Angler's Coffee. It's darn near perfect. Hey anglers, if you're like me, you're always on the hunt for new trout streams to explore. But finding these hidden gems can be challenging. Well, not anymore, because there's a new app I highly recommend called Trout Routes. Trout Routes has mapped out every trout stream by state with detailed access maps for every stream. They have over 15 different map layers with hundreds of thousands of access points, color-coded stream ratings, public and private land, and more. Just this spring, I was in the driftless region of Wisconsin, and man, was it awesome to have the Trout Routes app on my phone to help us do some exploring. Trout routes made it so easy to find new water and access points that we never would have known about. They also have local fly shops, the ability to take notes, and even local stream regulations, and you can download maps for offline use. Today, Trout Routes covers 25,000 trout streams in 34 states, and, big announcement, by the year end, the entire lower 48 will be added. So if you have an upcoming trip anywhere in the lower 48 or looking to explore nearby streams, I suggest you check out Trout Routes today on your Apple or Android phone. Don't leave home without it. Tell me about this upper Lost River range or upper Lost River drainage. This is the area you want to key in on. Where is that, and why is that area, such a great destination for alpine lake fishing in your mind?
So in the upper Snake region, we've got about little over 70 something alpine lakes, and the majority of those are in the upper Lost River drainage. There are a couple mountain ranges there at the headwaters of the river drainage, and these are fairly young mountains. And I say young in comparison to like Colorado, for instance, where the mountains are all really high, high elevations, lots of 14ers there. And those alpine lakes are a little higher, whereas over here in the Lost River drainage, Pioneer Mountain Range, for instance, little lower elevation, but we've got high mountain lakes that are over 10,000 feet in elevation. And this area actually has the highest elevation lake in the state in which we have a trout population.
Oh.
So that's one unique thing about it. But the other component is that these lakes are accessible to a wide and diverse group of anglers. So we've got lakes that you can hike to, horseback ride to. You can even take e-bikes to some of them. You can take the llamas, of course. And then we've even got some that you can take an ATV or an OHV to access some of these lakes.
Nice.
And then within our region, we've even got a few lakes that are high mountain or alpine that you can drive within a half mile or so to those, and then have a short walk to them. So I think that because these are accessible to a diverse group of anglers, that makes them really unique. And on top of that, I mentioned that some of these lakes are on a circuit, so you can do a loop through hike and hit, a half dozen lakes, for instance, on one trip.
Cool.
That makes it pretty cool. And then we also have a wide variety of species over there. We've got Yellowstone cutthroat trout, rainbow trout, golden trout, grayling, tiger trout in a couple of our high mountain lakes. And then we even have some triploid lake trout that are in one high mountain lake, which is kind of a cool, unique thing.
What's that? Triploid. What's a triploid?
Triploid trout. So triploids, they're sterile fish. They can't reproduce naturally. So they also grow a little bit faster than, say, a fertile fish. So if we stock triploids, that won't interfere with any kind of wild population. So for instance, like when we stock rainbow trout that are catchable size and put in take fisheries, those are triploid fish, so that they don't interfere with our wild trout genetics. Yeah.
So they look like a rainbow, but they're sterile.
Yep, exactly. You wouldn't know it's triploid just by looking at it.
Are most of the lakes stocked, or do you have some lakes that are self-sustaining?
We do. We've got self-sustaining trout populations in some of our alpine lakes, and they have to have some other characteristics. So those lakes that have self-sustaining populations have locations where fish can spawn, so like inlets or outlets, groundwater upwellings. So they need that to be able to reproduce. And then there's got to be locations for rearing. So these tiny fish, these fingerlings and fry, when they hatch, they're a good meal for a trout at 10,000 feet.
Right.
So there's got to be some habitat where these things can hide in the rocks and some interstitial spaces and whatnot, and then some forage and to get them growing. So we do have wild population or naturally reproducing populations, and then we still stock some of our lakes on a rotational basis, say like once every 3 years, and we stock them with fingerlings. So they're really small, and we put them in these bags, fill them up with a little bit of water, and then we put 100% oxygen in the bags, and then we can take them into the Alpine lakes, and then we stock those lakes with fry or fingerlings.
Oh, that's cool. So are you dropping those out of airplanes, or are you saying you actually carry all those bags up with you?
In the upper Snake region, we do pretty much all of our stocking by putting those fish in backpacks and taking them ourselves, either on our backs or with llamas or horseback.
Really?
Some of the other,
Wow.
yeah. So we put in a lot of work to visit these lakes, and that provides us with additional opportunities so that we can also sample the lakes and see how the population is doing, which informs whether or not we need to stock and the amount of fish that we need to stock. But some of the other regions throughout the state will use planes and helicopters to do stocking, because some of those lakes are more remote than others. So there's a sweet spot. You've got only a certain amount of time for that oxygen to sustain those fish to get them up to a lake. So luckily, a lot of the lakes in our region and that big lost drainage, you can get to in a day trip. So that's why we still do it on foot or horseback.
Oh, that's nice. You must be in good shape to be doing all that. I'm wondering, like, when you come in the office on a Monday morning, and did you guys like draw straws to see who has to like backpack in the fish versus the helicopter guy? What? How's that work?
Yeah, yeah. It's our fish manager. I think Brett Haigh. So I think you've done a
Yeah.
chat with him in the past.
Right. We did the Henry's Fork in 2020 with Brett. He was great.
Yeah, so Brett High's my supervisor, and he kind of decides who gets to do what. But we
Oh yeah.
we collaborate. Yeah, we collaborate with the Forest Service as well, and they'll help us stock some of these lakes. But it goes on a rotation, and because most of the high mountain lakes in our region are in my management area, I usually get first dibs on which lakes I want to stock. So it's given me the opportunity to visit almost all of our lakes in the 3-4 years that I've worked in this region. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I bet you maybe you take a nice meal over to Brett's house on a Sunday afternoon. Just hey, Brett.
Yeah, hey Brett, here's some cookies.
Yeah, right. Bake me some cookies, and you get your pick.
Right.
And this area I was looking at these pictures you sent me and just looking online. I mean, this is a beautiful area, and these mountains are rugged mountains. And I'm wondering, for the average angler, if I'm hiking in, you say I can reach most of these lakes in a day trip and come back, or like how good a shape do you feel like people need to be in if they're hiking in?
I think it depends on the kind of trip they want. You could really hustle and do a lake that's 6 miles away one way in a day, but that's a lot of work. So
Yeah.
we generally try to backpack in and hit a few lakes on a single trip and be gone for like 4 or 5 nights. There are some lakes that are only 2 or 3 miles one way, and there's a lot of elevation gain involved with that, and so it just depends. Everybody can go at their own pace, and we've got resources to help people plan their trips so that, based on their level of experience or how much energy they want to put into this, we've probably got something for them. And so it varies. It's like if you're not in the best shape or you don't like hiking, we've got lakes that are, less than a mile away that you can hike into, or we've got the lakes that you can drive an ATV or an OHV into if you've got other limitations. And with some of our partners, that's why we've kind of worked with them so that we can provide this opportunity to all kinds of people, regardless of how good a shape they are or aren't in.
And you said earlier that there was a lake in your region that's the highest alpine lake with fish. And how high is that lake?
I think that one is around 10,500 thereabouts.
Okay, it's not too bad, I don't think.
It's not too high in comparison to some places, but the elevation gain is the kicker. I think it's close to 4,000 feet elevation gain
Ooh,
to get to that
okay.
lake. So
That'll get your attention.
yeah, it's not super high, but it's a trek or a slog to get up there, because you start so low.
Okay. In the lakes that are closer, does it go without saying that if a lake's just a couple miles in, are those typically the lakes that are going to see a little more pressure?
Yeah, most likely they probably will see a little more pressure, but it can also be time of year. If you go in earlier in the summer, once it ices out, there's probably going to be nobody. If you go in the middle of summer, say like late July, early August, there might be some people there. But that's not always the case. Like I've encountered Boy Scout troops at lakes that are, 8,000 feet or whatever, and there's like 20 people there. And
Yeah.
so it's just kind of random. And I would say that's not always the case, where the closer it is, the more people that are going to be there. I think timing has a big aspect of that. Like if you want more solitude, I'd probably do a trip midweek as opposed to the weekend. But there are enough lakes that you can really split up and find something that's off the beaten path.
Yeah. You said the state has some great resources to help people, figure out what lakes they want to go to. Like, can you talk about those? And like, how do you, if I'm an angler who's never been to Idaho and done this, how can I kind of size up a lake, and figure out how good the fishing's going to be?
So I would recommend anybody planning a trip to high mountain lakes in Idaho visit our Alpine lake fishing page on the Idaho Fish and Game website. It's really easy to find. If you go to our website, in the search bar at the top, you just type in Alpine lake fishing, and it'll be the first search result. And when you go there, there are, resources on where to fish, how to fish some of these lakes, techniques, gear types, and we even have links to our annual reports and fisheries investigations into some of these lakes. And so that's the best place to start. You click on where to fish, it'll take you to a page where you can choose a lake. So say you want to come to the Upper Snake region, you can go to our fishing planner and it'll give you a list of lakes. You can click on the region you're going to visit. You can even connect to the fish stocking history for all of our lakes.
Okay.
And then there's even links to our reports and, when the most recent investigation was and what species were found there. But if, you want to start getting into like the size structure, you can call the regional office and ask me or another biologist to find out those information. Or if you like reading technical reports, you can read our technical reports, and that'll give you all the facts about those lakes in the surveys that have been done there. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. Well, let's shift gears for a minute. I'm kind of curious if you could talk about, fish behavior in these alpine lakes. Like, what am I, as an angler, what am I looking for in terms of, where the fish are going to be feeding, what their cover looks like, that kind of thing?
That's a great question. And, it varies by lake. So higher elevation lakes, they're going to more likely be what we call oligotrophic. And so they're very low productivity lakes. And I fish a lot of these lakes, and you'll actually be fishing, say a dry fly, you've got a beetle on, like the story I talk about with the big Yellowstone cutthroat trout, fishing a beetle. And sometimes you'll see fish come out of nowhere. They're like 20 feet deep, and they see a morsel of food land on the surface, and they'll swim up out
They're
of,
on it.
some boulders and swim up and hit it. So I generally look for some kind of structure is the first place I'll search, because these lakes are generally really clear. And so the fish are going to try to avoid predators like birds of prey. And so they'll be around structure, whether it's steep drop-offs or boulder scree fields, even weed patches or aquatic vegetation patches. So I'll look for those kinds of things. And when I first approach a high mountain lake, I'll survey it, just look around, see if there's anything rising to the surface, see if there are fish swimming around in the shallow area, which we call the littoral zone. And if I see, some cruisers or some surface action, then I'll start off with a dry fly, something that's an attractor or a terrestrial. If there's no hatch going on, I'll generally start with a terrestrial. So a beetle, an ant, a grasshopper, something like that.
Okay.
But some lakes get great midge or trotomid hatches. We get calabatus, so mayflies on some other lakes. And I'll fish it or approach it the same way as the trout stream. So I'll just look to see what it's telling me, what is happening in the environment, and if there's any fish behavior that I can key in on with my fly selection.
Okay.
Yeah. So does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, that's helpful. I was curious because I've had really good luck if there's like a shallow area that heads out, you give you 10, 20, 30 yards, and then there's a drop off there, and kind of take my my boots off, roll my pants up, and wade in there, and put those flies right on that edge where the shallow and the deep meets. I've had better luck there than I have just like a super deep spot right next to the bank where you can't see any fish. I mean, I've caught fish in both areas, but I mean, is there a lot of food on those, you call it littoral zones, in the shallow shoal areas, or where's the food for these trout?
That's another great question. I think that in those littoral zones, there often can be more food because that shallow water warms a lot faster than the deeper water. And so if that might cue some macroinvertebrate activity, and the fish are going to key in on that. And like you said, those transitional locations are really important because they can, go from deep water with some cover into those shallow areas to feed, and then get out of there really quick if they sense, some kind of predator, a shadow or something overhead. Then that gives them a quick exit point. And I agree with you. I've had a lot of success identifying those shelves and those drop-off points adjacent to shallower water.
Right.
And, time of year, we also see fish in those littoral zones if they're spawning or trying to spawn. So sometimes you might see, a few fish spawning, and then you see another fish that's just cruising around eating eggs, because life for a trout at high elevation can be really tough, and they're opportunistic. So they'll eat eggs, they eat the fry when they hatch. And so they're on the cruise for whatever forage opportunities available.
So if a fish is in an eating mood, is it usually cruising? What's your experience been?
Yeah, I generally find feeding fish cruising quite a bit. I often don't see fish stationary in the alpine lakes unless they're facing an inlet, where they're getting some oxygen. But aside from that, I generally have success intercepting cruising fish, and those cruising fish are often on the feed.
Yeah, right. Oh my gosh, I've had just banner days doing that. You cast a dry fly out there, and sometimes you got to twitch it just a little bit to get them to notice it. And I mean, I've had fish charge these things from 10 yards away, come shooting out of the water with the fly in its mouth. And it's exciting. That's just fun.
Yeah, that's really exciting. That gets me pumped up to want to go do it.
Yeah, right. Oh my gosh. Okay, you were talking about some terrestrials. Like what sizes are your ants and beetles out there? What size flies should people be bringing, and what kind of patterns would you recommend?
I'll generally fish, most of my high mountain lake terrestrial patterns are like 10 to 16, and it just varies. I try to have a variety in those size classes just to mimic whatever is on the banks. And for fish size, if you hit, some lakes, or some times a day, like the fish won't engulf the fly. They'll kind of nip at it. And those bigger hooks, sometimes they won't get it in their mouth, and you'll miss a lot of hook sets. So, that's why I like using the smaller flies, like down to 16, just to improve my catch rates and hookups. So that's generally the size range I'll be in. And then I always have some nymphs and some small streamers as well. So some lakes have leeches in them, and those can be really productive patterns. The small like micro streamers can also imitate fingerlings in these lakes, and then your nymph patterns, that's just to imitate what's there. So to imitate chironomids or calabatus nymphs, or scuds. We have a lot of scuds in our alpine lakes, and
Yeah.
you're going a long ways to fish these lakes, putting in a lot of effort. So I kind of like to be prepared, and I can generally squeeze it all into one fly box that'll cover the gamut of what I might encounter at a high mountain lake. Yeah.
Are you carrying different flies in? I'm assuming you are, like in the spring, in the summer, and then maybe a little later in the year. You got a totally different selection, or are you kind of relying on a lot of the same flies?
A lot of the same flies, like parachute Adams, that'll imitate a calabatus if you get it the right size. That can imitate
Yeah.
a midge with a trailing shuck. So I try to keep it simple and general, and carry, flying ants, black ants, brown ants, and then some beetles in different colors, some black ones, some purple ones, and then some small hoppers that have orange bodies, yellow, red, and then, some stimulators, and then some general mayflies in different colors, like, just trying to use those attractor patterns to their full potential.
It would give me a range of, some of the patterns you mentioned, like what size patterns are you using?
I really like size 14 and 16 parachute Adams. I really like size 12 to 16 black beetles with some legs, and a little indicator on them. And then for subsurface, the nymphs, so scuds, I'll generally go a little bigger, like a 10 or 12 for scuds, and I'll try to bring those in like an olive color as well as orange. And then the micro streamers, I'll go a little bigger, and I'll fish some like 6s to 12s in little woolly buggers, or I'll tie my own patterns. And I like having some colors. So black, olive, white. White is really good to imitate the fingerlings. That'll imitate a lot of different trout species.
Okay. Yeah. When do you go from like black to olive to white or whatever color you're using, like in a woolly bugger? Is it sunlight, or, how do you decide?
That's a great question. I will let sunlight come into my fly choice a little bit with the streamers. Sometimes I will actually use a darker color with high sun because it makes a bigger silhouette, and it doesn't really blend in. So
Huh.
like if it's a super sunny day, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm probably not going to throw white unless I see fingerlings swimming around. I'll throw a darker color like black or olive
Really?
to
Okay.
just provide a profile. And that's a technique I learned from bass fishing growing up, creating these certain profiles with your color choice. But, some fish species like sculpin, their color can actually change. So, if you see that there's an inlet or an outlet to a high mountain lake, maybe there's some sculpin in there, and sculpin, will actually, if they're in under a lot of cover, they'll be a darker color. Whereas if they're out in the sun trying to camouflage in, then they'll be a lighter color. So it also comes into play with what you're trying to imitate.
Okay. Okay. And are you varying your retrieve, like when you're, like let's say you're nymph fishing, are you usually hanging that off of a terrestrial, and do you twitch it a little bit, or what are you doing there?
Yeah, I'll try both. So I often, if I start with a dry fly and I'm not picking up fish, then I'll put a dropper on it and I'll continue that like twitch, pause, retrieve kind of stuff. And if that doesn't pick up fish, then I'll go straight nymph by itself or with a double nymph rig and toss it out or cast it out and then let it sink for, 10, 15 seconds and then retrieve it with either short jerks, and then let it pause, or like longer strips. And I'll just vary the retrieve until I can figure out what they're keying in on. And, if you cast out and you let it sink and then you do a short jerk retrieve with like a pause, that will look like an emerging insect. And I've had a lot of success. If I'm not picking up fish, I'll switch to a retrieve like that and do really well because the fish are most likely keying in on something subsurface, and it just provides a more lifelike, realistic imitation, giving it some action like that.
Okay. And how much do water temps affect the fishing, do you think?
I don't think they affect it a ton. I mean, high mountain lakes are cold,
Yeah.
and yeah, if they often don't get above 10 degrees Celsius. So if you go out to say a mid elevation lake, it's only maybe 6,000 vertical feet. That lake might be more productive than a lake at 10,000 feet. I'd say it probably is. So a lake like that, if you go out and fish it at ice out, there's probably going to be fish cruising, looking for forage opportunities. But it might actually start fishing better in the season when it gets a little warmer and maybe there's more insect activity happening. But then on the other hand, if you're fishing a lake at 10,000 feet, it might be consistent. It might fish the same consistently all summer just because the temperature might not change as much.
Huh, interesting.
But yeah, the high mountain lakes, if it does get a little bit warmer, I'd say that probably improves the fishing because there's probably more food that's active and their metabolism can increase related to that warmer water temperature. Yeah.
And so what is warmer water? 50s?
Yeah, I'd say warmer water for a high mountain lake is like closer to 60, and there aren't a lot that might get to that. It's mostly those mid elevation lakes, and so a lot of the lakes that I visit in our region, they're often in the low 50s
Oh, wow. Okay.
throughout most of the summer. Yeah, and then right at ice out, they'll probably be just in the 40s, mid 40s.
Yeah, there you go. Do you take a pair of waders up typically, or are you just kind of rock hopping and jumping in?
Yeah, I usually rock hop, and I'll take a pair of sandals that I can wade in if I choose to.
Okay.
But like I said, it's cold, and I'm impressed that
Yeah.
you do that too. Just 10,000 feet. All right, I'm going for it. My bare feet. Yeah.
I like those neoprene socks, man. Those are like life changers. You get your Tevas on, and you put those neoprene socks under them, and you can stand colder water a lot longer with a pair of those on.
Yeah, you're right. I employ that technique quite a bit. Definitely wet wading in the summer on the rivers, and I'll pack those in high mountain lakes too, because it's lightweight for a little bit more comfort.
Yeah, exactly. What's your setup? Rod, reel, tippets, leaders, that kind of thing?
So my ideal setup is usually a 9 foot rod, 4 or 5 weight. If you've got a 10 foot 4 weight, I would say that that's probably one of the best high mountain lake rods you can have.
Why is that? Why that extra foot?
That extra foot provides you with better roll casting if you're on a lake that has a lot of trees on the riparian area. Using a longer rod to roll cast 50, 60 feet, that's huge. And then the 4 weight I like because if you're into smaller fish, it still gives you a lot of fun. They can be a lot of fun and still put a really good bend in your rod. And then 5 weight, it's like the most universal trout rod in the world. So everybody's got one. I fish with a 9 foot 5 weight quite a bit, or a 9 foot 4 weight too.
Okay.
And then leader, I'll generally stick with a 9 foot leader, and I'll attach some tippet to it. I'll start out 9 foot 4X leader with another 18 inches or so of 4X tippet tied to that, to see how the fish behave, if they're leader shy or not, and then you can always expand to that and put some 5X on if they're being a little spooky. And then if I start streamer fishing, I'll cut that back and try to stick with around 7 to 8 feet and drop it down to probably 3X. The longer leader can come in handy if you're fishing a nymph setup and you're trying to get that your presentation deep, and then you want to retrieve it like that imitation is coming up into the water column. And then in those cases, you can extend your leader length to like 15, 20 feet if you can cast that. So it really helps, suspend if you got that floating line, it'll really help suspend that nymph imitation a lot deeper and give you that presentation of an emerging insect.
Right.
So yeah, I'll generally take a couple packs, 3X and 4X leaders, 7.5 to 9 feet long, and then I'll take generally 3 spools, a tippet, 3, 4, 5, and call it good. You can generally get away with just about anything in Alpine lakes with that amount of gear.
So how are the lakes doing from a conservation standpoint? Like, what are you guys concerned about, if anything?
They're doing really well. I think that's a testament to this program is that we first introduced fish into some high mountain lakes in the 19th century, and some of these lakes have developed into naturally reproducing systems, and they generally do really well because the water is clean and cold, and that's great for trout. That's what they need. I think that the biggest, not really a threat, but the issue that we can often encounter are fish kills. And that generally occurs because a lake gets too cold or there isn't enough forage or habitat for the amount of fish in there. And so there can be die-offs. And some lakes are shallower than others. And if that particular mountain range gets a really cold winter, those lakes can freeze pretty deep down, and it just doesn't give much space or oxygen for the fish to survive. So I'd say that's the thing that we encounter is our fish kills due to environmental conditions. But aside from that, that's about it. Some of our lakes we don't put fish in because there are native amphibians there, and so we just leave those alone. Other lakes, if we've introduced fish there, then we've created a fishery for people to enjoy. And if we introduce fish there, then there really isn't a big threat that can affect them. I guess another thing that we kind of deal with and manage with is our stunted populations. We see this with brook trout quite a bit, where brook trout in not only alpine lakes, but even in some high elevation streams, they will just become more mature. They'll become more mature at a smaller size. So the population density will just get so thick, so many fish, that a spawning advantage is to mature at a younger age and a smaller size. And so that ultimately can lead to stunted populations where the average length of fish is much smaller than what it could be if there were, a predator in there to help mitigate that abundance.
Yeah. I've seen fish that have like overly large heads in some of these lakes and smaller bodies. Is that a stunted fish? Is that what they look like?
Yeah, so not entirely. That I would say is a lack of a prey base for the density of fish that are in there. So we see that sometimes where the fish are skinny and they got a really big head, and that can also happen after spawning. You might see that where they were really large, healthy, and rotund right before spawning, and then they spawn, they get rid of all that weight from their gonads and that development, and then they'll be really skinny, and they've got to put that weight back on through eating. But that can also occur if the density of fish is too high and the prey resources aren't there to support that. So, these are things we look at when we do our evaluations on high mountain lakes. So we do full surveys where we angle for fish to get catch rates, because we manage our high mountain lakes for 1 fish per hour. And then we also do some gill netting so that we can get our hands on fish and assess the structure. So how long they are, how much they weigh, what that length to weight relationship is. And then we can look at the population as a whole and see, the different age classes and the peaks in those. And that helps us inform our stocking rates. So, if we go visit a lake and we sample it and we see a lot of fish that are really small, we could be like, well, population might be stunted. Let's scale back the number of fish that we put in there. Or we can say, let's just let this play out and see how the size structure develops after there's some mortality in the population. Or we can also, in some cases, introduce a predator that can help mitigate that stunted population. Say like a
what would a
tiger
predator
trout.
be? Oh, tiger trout, just a bigger fish.
Yeah, bigger fish that's piscivorous, that likes to eat other fish, and that can help alleviate the density of that stunted fish population. And it provides anglers with a new opportunity for a novel species. Like, how many times have you fished for tiger trout at 9,000 feet? So
Not very often. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, shifting gears for a minute, John, what's kind of your story? Like, how did you get so interested in fisheries work and biology and all that stuff?
I'll give you the edited version that's much shorter. I grew up in central Pennsylvania, in Spring Creek limestone country.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so I grew up fishing, waters like Penns Creek, Big Springs Creek, some of those. I grew up in trout country, and I learned to fish at a really young age. My dad and my uncle used to take me out, and my cousins every year, and we do a bunch of trout fishing. I moved to Louisville, Kentucky as a teenager, and I lived down there for a while. I got a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Louisville, and all during that time, I learned more about bass fishing, and I was taking trips with my buddies up to Canada to fish for walleye and smallmouth and pike. But I still always had this desire to chase trout in the mountains. And fortunately for me, my sister just so happened to move to Colorado when she's a little older than me, but she moved to Colorado at some point. And so I used to go out there and visit her in my summers during college, and I would spend my time fishing creeks and rivers throughout Colorado for trout. And then eventually, I got my bachelor's degree from U of L, and a year after I completed that, I moved to Western Wyoming, and I got a job at a guest ranch way up in the mountains, and I was
Nice.
like, I want to be a fishing guide, and so um, I spent some time guiding fishing, mostly in alpine settings, so high mountain lake fishing, high alpine streams, and doing that for a while, and then I moved to Jackson, Wyoming, and I was, well, there's no better way to put it, but I was a bum. I I spent all my time fishing and snowboarding, so lots of good years just chasing native trout, Yellowstone cutthroat trout, and then getting a lot of days in the mountains in the wintertime snowboarding.
Nice.
And during that period, I had a friend that worked for Wyoming Game and Fish, and I started volunteering with them. And there was a part of me that was always more interested in the biological side of what was happening with fish when I was out there on the water. And I was always interested in, habitat and insects and stuff, and why they were behaving the way they were, and what, affected populations. And so I eventually went back to school, and I got another bachelor's degree in science, studying fishery science at Oregon State University. And after I completed that, I worked for Wyoming Game and Fish as a technician for a few years, and I just knew that I wanted to be a fisheries biologist. Want to be a regional fisheries biologist. I get to spend a good chunk of the year outside on rivers and lakes, reservoirs, sampling fish, playing with fish, and so I started looking for grad school opportunities, and I got on a project at the University of Idaho in the cooperative research unit. And there I studied West Slope cutthroat trout in the panhandle of Idaho. And the timing just worked out. I finished my graduate research in 2018. And that winter, I was writing my thesis, writing some papers, and Idaho Fish and Game had some vacancies come up, and I applied and went through that process, and I was lucky enough to get a job.
Yeah. Good for you and good for all of us. It sounds like an amazing career so far, and lots of degrees in there. It sounds like you've worked hard and studied a lot to get where you are.
Yes. Thanks. I appreciate that. I have. I've worked pretty hard. It wasn't easy going back to school later in life, but I did it so that I could achieve, my goal of being a fish biologist. And so, I couldn't
There
be
you go.
happier. I love my job. I love the region I'm in, the people I work with. The Idaho Fish and Game is a spectacular agency. We do a lot of science, and we really make science-based management decisions, and it just goes along with all this training and studying that I've done to get to this point.
Yeah, and in all your years of fishing and hunting and hiking and I don't know, spending time with your family in Pennsylvania, I'm wondering what's kind of been your, one or two of your favorite memories in all those years.
You know, it's a recent memory. I have a 4-year-old son, and
Nice.
this this summer, he started catching fish with spinning tackle, and the smile on his face when he catches a fish or when he
Oh,
holds a fish,
yeah,
there's nothing like it. And that's probably at the top of my list. I mean, that
man, I'm with
outweighs,
you.
that that really outweighs catching, giant trophy sized trout. And just seeing that and his reaction, it's really something that gets
Oh,
me. And he loves going out on the boat. We do a lot of floating on the Henry's Fork and the South Fork, and every time I bring the boat home, he's like, "Oh, we're going fishing." I'm like, "Yep." He goes and gets in the boat. I'm like, "Well, we're not going right now, but we're going tomorrow." And
Yeah, he's just gonna wait for you.
exactly. Like that's been great. That's been, one of my best memories.
That's awesome.
In addition to that, I've caught lots of great fish. I really enjoy catching large trout on dry flies. That's not always the case. Some of my biggest fish have come subsurface on nymphs and streamers. But yeah, just getting out and trying to hit the hatches on the Henry's Fork. That's one of my favorite things to do every year. And then I generally will go on a bull trout trip in Idaho once a year in the summertime, and that's very rewarding too. Just some of the places that we have to fish in Idaho where they're secluded and you can target some really big trophy-sized trout in them. That's been a lot of fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of cool things, a lot of funny things in my years, hiking and fishing and whatnot, and surprising critters, like seeing grizzly bears. That's always kind of unnerving, popping up over a ridge.
Oh, have you seen a couple?
Yeah, I've seen a few in Wyoming when I used to live over there. I've seen some grizzly bears. The closest I've encountered one is still, pretty far, but like 200 yards or so. That's about as close as I want to be. But still, seeing those things in the wild, it's always a surprising thing.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious, what were you doing when you saw that grizzly bear, when you got that close to that grizzly bear?
We were actually on our hike. It's funny, that day we saw 3 bears. So I was with a buddy and we were on a hike out. We were fishing a river that was in a wilderness area, and we were on our hike out, and it just so happened to be huckleberry season. And the first thing, now this is all coming back to me, I remember we were hiking up the trail, picking huckleberries as we go, just kind of taking our time. And we came around this bend in the trail that led into a really steep draw. And all of a sudden, we just see this big black thing jumping up over these deadfall lodgepole pines, probably like, I don't know, maybe 60 feet away. And we both were shocked. And I had my dog with me, and my dog just stopped and pointed him. And I'm like, holy cow, that was a black bear.
He pointed the bear?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, totally. And black bear ran up the draw, and we were like, holy crap, that was a close call. So we were on edge, at that point, and we were on our way out, and it was dusk by the time we got back to our rig, and there was this big open field, and sure enough, we were sitting at the car, just looking at the scenery, and we see a couple of grizzly bears just coming out of the woods, walking
the same
across
day.
this field. Yep, same day. And we were shocked. We were like, holy cow, man, we got out of the woods just in time. Yeah, so that was pretty exciting afternoon after catching cutthroat trout all day.
I'll say. Did those grizzly bears pay any attention to you?
No, they didn't. I mean, it was pretty still. There wasn't much wind. I don't know if they didn't see us or smell us, but yeah, they weren't interested. And luckily, we were by the car, so we were able to hop in and get out of there before they came any closer.
Good for you. Oh my gosh. One other question I've got for you, just real quick in our couple minutes we got left here. How are the Alpine streams in this area, this big Lost River area?
That's pretty good question, Steve. So I did actually a basin-wide survey in the Big Lost drainage this summer, which is something we do once every 5 years. And this is a long-term data set with a lot of fish data over several decades. And we sample Alpine streams throughout that watershed. And this year, just off the top of my head, looking at our data, the fish populations are doing well. There's only one native salmonid in the Lost River drainage, and that's the Rocky Mountain whitefish.
Okay.
So we actually encountered more whitefish than we have in a couple decades. And we also encountered them at more sites than we've seen in a while. So that's a testament that, these streams are doing pretty well. They're pretty healthy. And, this is kind of a side note about cutthroat trout in the upper Snake region. We often find that the higher elevation alpine streams generally have healthier populations of native fish than lower down in systems where you start getting into mixed populations with some other non-native species. Yeah, so the alpine streams have been doing pretty well, and in the Big Lost in particular, this year, I thought we got some good data that's showing things are healthy. Yeah, and fish populations are looking good.
That's cool. Earlier, we were talking about your favorite fly patterns, and I'm wondering, would you be willing to take a couple pictures of those and send them over to me, and I can put those out on our Facebook and Instagram pages?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I can do that.
That'd be great. I think people would love to see that. All right, now, what towns would you say anglers should base their operations? Like, if I'm coming to this area to hit these alpine lakes, like, where am I going to find some fly shops and some restaurants before I head up into the mountains?
So the nearest town to the Lost River drainage, the headwaters, we call it Copper Basin. And if you ever visit the area, you'll understand why, because of the geology. So Mackay, Idaho is the closest town there. There isn't a fly shop, but you can get some resources like some food and, some gear prep. But most likely, anglers will probably start off from Idaho Falls. That's where our regional office is. And so here we've got an abundance of fly shops. Being in close proximity to the Henry's Fork and the South Fork, we've got fly shops galore.
Tons of them.
Yeah.
Okay.
So plenty of restaurants here, hotels, and fly shops all over the place. We've got some outdoor retailer shops where folks can get camping and backpacking equipment if they need it. And then, some of our fly shops, they've got some insight on our high mountain lakes and what you might need to prep. In addition to, our Alpine Lake fishing page, you can find a lot of information there on, lakes to go to, the gear you need, how many days it's going to take you to do a trip, links to maps and all of that stuff.
Oh, nice. Well, man, this has been great talking to you, John. Thanks for being on the show.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And how can people get in touch with you if they've got some questions?
So if folks want some more details and they want to get in touch with me, the best way is probably through my email, which is my first name, John, John, Heckel, Heckel, at idfg.idaho.gov.
Okay, perfect.
And that's my work email. October has quite a bit of hunting going on, so if people are, So I generally try to get back to folks within the week that they email me, unless I'm out.
Okay.
And a lot of people will plan if they're coming from out of the area. They'll start planning their Alpine Lake fishing excursions over the winter. I'm in the office a lot during the winter time, so feel free to reach out to me if you've got questions.
All right. Well, there you go, folks. John, thanks for making yourself available, and thanks for all the work you do for all of us and the people who live in Idaho and come visit Idaho. And wish you extraordinary success in all your adventures to follow. And thank you, folks, for listening. And we will post John's contact info on the Destination Angler show notes and pictures of his top flies on our Facebook and Instagram pages. So be sure to head over there and check that out. As always, you can DM me or email me with comments and suggestions at shaig50@gmail.com. Hey, if you like the show, please share it with a buddy. That's how we get more listeners, from all you guys telling your friends about the show. As always, our music is by a Brothers Fountain, a great little band out of Colorado. Hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll see you again soon. Tight lines, everybody.
Well, I'll go from the land to the shining sea. But I know there's more to life than what the eye can see.